Hare Krishna, everybody. My name is Krishna Dulal Das, and I'm going to be your MC for this evening. I'd like to welcome you all to our ISKCON Ottawa Sunday Feast. This is at 212 Somerset Street East, Sandy Hill. It's the residence of Sri Shigora Nitai. Welcome to all of you who are joining us again. And if any of you are joining us for the first time, extra welcome to you as well. So what we just finished doing is we had an arti ceremony, a celebration. So there's paraphernalia that was being offered to the Lord, and we did prayers to Lord Nishingadev. And now we're going to have a class. We have a special guest joining us for the first time here in Ottawa on Zoom, and there will be a discussion facilitated by him. And after which there will be some time for questions and comments. We're hoping just to get everything a little bit more stimulated. The more interaction and the more lively it is, the better. So I'm saying that somebody's going to be speaking because we have our introducer that is here this evening. Is Yeshika, Mother Yeshika, are you here?
Yes, Prabhu.
She's here, yeah. So Mother Yeshika will introduce our guest speaker. I see that he logged in here. He's on Zoom. So I'll take it over to you, okay? Go for it.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Once again, I'd like to welcome everyone to our Sunday Feast program. Today's special guest speaker is His Grace Kalakantha Prabhuji. He is a senior Vaishnava and a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. And he also coordinates an outreach program called Krishna House, which is near the University of Florida in Gainesville. And it's also one of the most successful outreach programs of ISKCON and has brought in many people into Krishna consciousness. Prabhuji has also written many books, including A God Who Dances, Krishna for You, and Bhagavad Gita, The Song Divine. And he's been teaching and inspiring devotees in Bhakti Yoga for over 40 years. And we're very fortunate to have his association today. So once again, I'd like to welcome His Grace Kalakantha Prabhuji and hand it over to him.
Yeah, welcome, Prabhu.
Haribol. So nice to be here with you. Thank you very much. That was such a jazzy kirtan, Krishna Dula Prabhu. I was quite impressed. And it's good to be here. I have visited Ottawa many years ago. When did the temple move to the new location, or to the current location?
Oh, many years ago. I don't know if Guru Prasad Prabhu is here. 40-something years ago. Does anybody know here on Zoom?
So it's the same location, huh? It's been all these years. And there was a restaurant there, I recall?
That's correct. There still is, yes.
Still is. Very nice. It's Ottawa, the capital and such an elegant city.
When were you here, Prabhu, in Ottawa?
It was 1985, I think. Okay. 88, maybe 90 there, somewhere in there. So I wanted to I have a topic in mind tonight, which is about steadiness in Krishna consciousness. But before we do that, I wanted to just ask, are there any guests in tonight's class who are in consciousness, who are just learning about it, who have just begun reading? Or do we have a veteran group here tonight? Anybody new, please raise your hand on Zoom if you know how to do that. Okay, good. So then I believe this topic will be pertinent for everybody. This topic I have in mind is called Steadiness in Krishna Consciousness. How to deal with ups and downs in a way that our spiritual lives remain unaffected. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Detarine. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhuvyeva Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2. I really love the Bhagavad Gita because Arjuna's questions are so pertinent and relevant to our lives, actually. And he expresses himself very honestly in the course of his conversation with Lord Krishna. We think about approaching Krishna with awe and veneration, which is natural and appropriate, but Arjuna is in the mood of a friend. And for a friend, we don't have such reservations. We are free to reveal what we're really feeling. And so in Arjuna's case, he feels quite a few different things. If you or I were before God, we would be overcome with awe and veneration. But for Arjuna, Krishna was somebody with whom he was familiar most of his life and with whom he was very close and with whom he had shared many confidential and intimate moments. So he turns to Krishna in his moment of despair. And Krishna explains how his despair is the result of a misunderstanding about the constitution of life as being spirit rather than body. He then goes on to explain how the process of yoga brings one above that illusion. So after hearing about yoga, Arjuna asks what, again, would be a very reasonable question. What is a qualification, or what are the qualities of somebody who has risen above the bodily concept of life? How do you tell such a person? How does such a person behave? How does such a person walk and talk? And in response, Krishna says, Prajahati yada kama, sarvaparta manogatan, atmanyevatmana tushta, stita pragya tarochate. That for a person who is above the bodily concept of life, the disturbances that arise from desires for enjoyment of this world that come from mental concoction diminish and don't affect such a person. And more importantly, a person takes pleasure in the self alone. Atmani evatmana tushta. This person is called a stita di, or a person who is fixed in consciousness. So that is our aspiration as devotees of Krishna, to become fixed in consciousness to the point where even the most drastic and severe disturbances don't affect us. So I'd like to read a little of Srila Prabhupada's purport to this verse, which is 255. Srimad Bhagavatam affirms that any person who is fully in Krishna consciousness has all the good qualities of the great sages, whereas a person who is not so transcendentally situated has no good qualifications, because he is sure to take refuge in his own mental concoctions. Consequently, it is rightly said herein that one has to give up all kinds of sense desire manufactured by mental concoction. Artificially, such sense desires cannot be stopped. But if one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, then automatically the sense desires subside without extraneous efforts. Therefore, one has to engage himself in Krishna consciousness without hesitation, for this devotional service will instantly help one onto the platform of transcendental consciousness. A highly developed soul always remains satisfied in himself by realizing himself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord. Such a transcendentally situated person has no sense desires resulting from petty materialism. Rather, he remains always happy in his natural position of eternally serving the Supreme Lord. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So that this notion of being fixed and steady in Krishna consciousness has a wonderful reward. It is that such a person is always happy, always happy. Elsewhere in the Gita, Krishna describes this knowledge as the king of education because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, and it is very joyfully performed. So one barometer of our spiritual life can be how happy are we feeling? You know, the modes of nature affect us all. And the impact of the mode of ignorance is that we may feel guilty. We use this word often, lamenting, but lamentation is also equivalent with feeling guilty. in many religious traditions, guilt is a powerful motivator, important motivator, that our Savior has sacrificed so much, so the least you can do is believe, you see. But guilt is an inadequate motivator for true spirituality because it's a negative. One is not happy when one feels guilty, right? So the guilt comes from the motive ignorance. Anxiousness, ambition, you could say, come from the motive passion. Sometimes devotees want to make spiritual advancement right now, real quickly. This is the motive passion kicking in. And that is also a reflection of the influence of the modes upon our devotional service, because we're not content with our current situation. I'm not advanced now, but I'm going to become advanced. I am on the path to advancement, and I'm going to traverse it very quickly. So when we're in the mode of goodness, we feel content. This is the difference between passion and ignorance and goodness in Krishna consciousness. In the mode of goodness, regardless of our situation, we feel content. We are grateful instead of greedy or guilty. We are grateful. We're glad to be where we are. We're glad to be under Krishna's shelter. We're glad to be in the association of devotees. We're glad to be affiliated with Srila Prabhupada. We're glad to be chanting and engaged in the movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There's so many things to be grateful for. And when we are in a mood of gratitude, we are experiencing devotional service in the mode of goodness. These modes and their influence on bhakti are described in the third canto by Lord Kapila Dev. It's very interesting section. I don't want to go into that now, but the point is to check our advancement. First question to ask ourselves is, how happy are we? Are we feeling content? Are we feeling satisfied? It's a wonderful burden, isn't it? You know, to just be able to evaluate our happiness quotient, our HQ. Are we feeling content? Well, if we are, then this is a good sign we're progressing in Krishna consciousness. We all know Srila Prabhupada's admonition, chant Hare Krishna and be happy. So one of my godbrothers, Brahma Prabhu, used to say that this is not a blessing, this is an order from Srila Prabhupada. Chant Hare Krishna, happy. So what do we need to do, therefore, to make ourselves happy, to feel happy in spiritual life? This is the question that we can ask ourselves. There's no harm if we are feeling unhappy about something. Even the author of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Vyasadeva, was feeling depressed about his circumstances. He didn't know the cause of his depression, but he asked his spiritual master, Narada Muni, why am I feeling so dissatisfied? Even though by all appearances I have accomplished everything that one could desire in spiritual life. So Narada Muni told him, you haven't directly glorified Krishna sufficiently. This is the problem with all your writing. You have been too indirect, too ambiguous in your approach. So this was the particular prescription for him. For us, it may be something different. But it is a good question to ask our mentors. It's a good question to ask ourselves. It's a good question to pray and ask Krishna. What is it that is causing me to be less than grateful, less than fully satisfied, to be feeling incomplete in my spiritual life? So presenting that question, framing it properly, addressing it properly, this is something we can do at any stage, no matter how we're feeling. You know, it can be a real conflict in spiritual life when our feelings don't line up with our values. We have our values, we have our ideas of how we should be feeling, and then we have these feelings that are completely incongruous with them. So one strategy is to try to repress those feelings or pretend that they are not there. The problem with that is that Krishna is the super soul in our hearts, and therefore he knows these feelings, and we have nowhere to hide them. There's no rug we can sweep them under that Krishna doesn't know about. So then we have to present ourselves before the Lord like, okay, here I am. I should be happy. I should be so ecstatic to be in Krishna consciousness, and yet I'm feeling this way. So anyway, here I am. Please take me as I am. Like if you're cooking an offering and you don't have much time and you don't have many ingredients and you burn the chapati. So what are you going to do? Not offer Krishna any chapati, or to say, okay, Krishna, here's the burnt chapati. Sorry, please take it. This was the mood of Sanatana Goswami, who was living in poverty under a tree in Vrindavan. And he had a little deity of Madan Mohan. So he would beg a little flour and make some chapati, but he had no ghee and he had no salt. So he just offered this very plain chapati to Madan Mohan every day. And then one day Madan Mohan said to him, can't you at least get a little salt? So it so happened that a salt merchant was taking a barge full of salt up the Jamuna at that time and was grounded on the bank somehow and couldn't move. So the locals told him, you should ask Sanatana Goswami. He's very wise. He can help you. So the merchant asked Sanatana, what should I do? Sanatana said, just pray to Krishna. And the merchant prayed and the barge was freed. And the merchant was so grateful that he gave all of the proceeds from the sale to Sanatana to build a temple there for Madan Mohan. So this is the story of the Madan Mohanji temple on the banks of the Jamuna. So the point is, Sanatana Goswami, so impoverished, was offering whatever he had to Krishna with so much devotion. And similarly, we may have feelings or issues in our lives that are distracting our mind, that are incongruous with our values, but we can offer them to Krishna because they are real. Our feelings are reality. And sometimes they're the only reality that we know, the way we feel about things. So offering our feelings to Krishna honestly is one of the techniques for being happy in Krishna consciousness. Making sure that we are not trying to obscure our true selves from Krishna, thinking that we are going to need to be better before we can actually be honest with the Lord. There's no need for that. And this is one of the techniques of devotional service, one of the practices of devotional service. Sakyam, being friends with the Lord, knowing that Krishna is, he is our Suridam Sarvabhutanam. He is the best friend of all living entities. This brings us to a peaceful condition where we no longer feel the burden of having to hide things from Krishna. I was speaking with one of our students at Krishna House today, and the student said, I'm mad at Krishna. The student was going through some difficulty and said, I'm mad at Krishna. And I said, that's great. That's really good because you're being honest with Krishna. You're being yourself with Krishna. You're recognizing that you don't have to pretend with Krishna. It's such a burden, isn't it, when we feel we have to act one way in the presence of our friend? And is that person really our friend when we feel intimidated, so intimidated that we can't be ourselves? So it's okay to be mad at Krishna. Krishna may do things to make us mad with him. Just look how he treated the gopis. Just look how he treated them. He draws them out with his flute and they all come, and then he says, oh, very innocently, what are you all doing here? Don't you know it's dangerous out here? You should go back home. And so they did not appreciate this remark because they'd left everything and taken all this risk just to be with Krishna. And here he is telling them to go back. So they just refused to leave. They didn't object, they just didn't go anywhere. And so this was one example. Krishna made them unhappy, but they didn't deviate in their desire to be Krishna conscious, to be with Krishna, to have his association. And therefore Krishna accepted them. All right. So in the same way, Krishna may do things to make us upset, to make us mad, to test us. And the test is passed when, in spite of these things that are directly coming from Krishna, we persevere in our devotional service. All right, maybe I'm not going to be chanting my rounds ecstatically today. Maybe my mind's going to keep going back and chewing over this problem I have. Anyway, I'm chanting them. And Krishna, here they are, and I'm offering them to you, and Hare Krishna, you take them, because that's all I'm going to be able to offer today. This actually pleases Krishna very much when he sees the determination of his devotees. And so again, with the gopis as an example, Krishna then accepted their determination to be with him. They began going together through the night. He was playing the flute. They were following in his company and feeling very glad to be there, very happy. In fact, they began thinking, we are the most fortunate women on earth. We're with Krishna. So when Krishna sensed this pride in his devotees, he did not like that. So he disappeared and he was gone. And he left them in great anxiety again. Where is Krishna? So they spent the evening running around, talking to trees, asking everyone they could see, where is Krishna? Do you know where is Krishna? And finally, they gave up and just sang out their honest expression of their feelings of missing Krishna and separation. So then Krishna, seeing them in that frame of mind, again came back. And when he reappeared with them, they were so happy to see him. But at the same time, they had a question. Like, they wanted to know, why have you done this to us? Again, a very honest question. So they wanted to give expression to their feelings, but they didn't want to rock the boat. They didn't want to risk Krishna leaving them again. And so they said in the third person, Krishna, tell us, why is it that some people can't seem to reciprocate love? Very tactfully, they asked. So Krishna explained, there are three kinds of people. There are people who excuse me, give love if they are loved. If somebody loves them, they love back. And he says, but this isn't love in the highest sense. This is more of a business deal. You scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. Then he said, there are those who give love even when they're not loved in return. And those people fall into three categories. They are either saints who love everybody because they see the soul in everyone, or they are true friends who love us regardless of how we reciprocate, or they are parents because parents will always love their children regardless. So those people are unconditional in their love. But then the third category is people who don't give love even when they are given it. And those people, Krishna said, fall in two categories. They are either very selfish and they have no ability to think of anyone but themselves, or they are great yogis who are atmaram, who are content within themselves. And even if they have no need to reciprocate that love. For explaining all of this, Krishna says, now, you're not thinking that I don't reciprocate your love, do you? Or are you? He said, because if you were thinking that, all I can say is that I would be unable to reciprocate your love. It's simply beyond my ability to reciprocate. And therefore, your love itself will have to be its own reward. So this is how Krishna tests even these great devotees by putting them in different kinds of anxiety. So there are, I just want to contextualize. Can you, okay, my internet is fluctuating.
You're okay now.
Okay, if you can't hear me, raise your hand and I'll move. So yes, so Krishna does put devotees in difficulty. We have so many examples in the Srimad Bhagavatam. All of the first canto, for example, we hear so much about Maharaj Yudhisthira. He is one of the central figures of the first canto of the Bhagavatam. And look at what he goes through. When we first see Yudhisthira, his sons, his 5 sons have just been killed. Arjuna goes and captures their killer, brings him back, and his brothers are arguing about what should be done with him. And then when that's resolved, he's feeling so much guilt and remorse for having been the cause of this war that killed so many men. And then he goes to Bhishma for advice, and Bhishma, his beloved Bhishma, is dying. So then there's a very brief period where Yudhisthira is happy in the first canto, when Parikshit Maharaj is born. And then after that, everything gets weird again, and he begins seeing all these evil omens, and then he hears that Krishna's disappeared and Krishna's family has killed each other, and then he just leaves. So this is this great devotee, this Ajatashatru, this person who has no enemies, who is so devoted to Krishna, just going through one difficult thing after the next, And never in all these difficulties did he fluctuate in his devotion to Krishna. So we see these lessons from these glorious devotees. Our troubles are far less consequential and significant, but they affect us nonetheless. So Lord Brahma gives a threefold method for dealing with difficulties and remaining steady in Krishna consciousness. The first step is to accept responsibility for our troubles. Instead of trying to look elsewhere to blame others, we accept that, no, I am getting this as a result of my own poor decisions and actions in the past. You know the old saying that when you point at somebody, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you, right? So my friend Akendra says, therefore, when you point at somebody else, you should point like this. Make sure there's no pointing back. But that's not the strategy. The point is to take responsibility in the first place. We have been the ones who have chosen to separate ourselves from Krishna. And whatever else anyone else may have done to us in the interim, that original decision is our responsibility and ours to correct. In the 1970s, there was a phenomenon called deprogramming, where devotees would be kidnapped because their loved ones thought they'd been brainwashed by the Hare Krishna cult, ours and other cults. So they would kidnap these devotees, take them to safe houses, and give them a sort of concentrated, what they called deprogramming, which was really actually an abusive kind of brainwashing, where they would be told all the terrible things about Krishna consciousness, and they would have clinical psychologists come in and try to convince the devotee that they had been manipulated and made decisions against their own will. So this is so hypocritical, because the essence of psychology and psychological counseling is to get clients to take responsibility for their own decisions, right? And that these psychologists would try to persuade their clients that, no, you weren't responsible for deciding to become a devotee. So, in fact, we do teach and we do understand that the essence of spiritual life is taking responsibility for our own actions. And that includes the sufferings that we undergo, even apparently at the hands of other people. to blame others for our suffering is not the path to happiness. Even if we are in the right, even if we could prove it in court, still, we have to forgive them because we gain nothing by blaming them. If we didn't want to have the problems that we have, then we should have not come to the material world in the first place. And that foundational understanding is what it means to take responsibility for one's actions in the highest and best sense. So this is step one of Lord Brahma's threefold procedure. The second one is to continue worshiping Krishna without interruption, in spite of the difficulty. With our hearts, with our minds, and our words, and our bodies, just with everything we can offer, giving it to Krishna, even though we're in a suffering condition. That persistence is what characterizes the devotee who progresses steadily in Krishna consciousness. And again, it's only possible to do that if we've taken responsibility for the suffering and not considering it others' fault. I have a friend, Peter Burwash, a good Canadian Canuck and athlete. And when he was first starting his career, he discovered Krishna consciousness and gave a hard-earned $1,000 to the temple president in Honolulu. So the temple president showed his appreciation by leaving the temple the next day with the $1,000. And Peter was understandably very upset. So he told Srila Prabhupada what happened. And Srila Prabhupada responded in a way that Peter said became one of the pillars of his spiritual life. Prabhupada said, do not blame the agent of your karma. Do not blame the agent of your karma. So having done that and accepted responsibility and plowing through regardless, this is the second step. Now, it can be very hard to continue with Krishna conscious activities with sadhana bhakti when our hearts are broken or our minds are disturbed or both, because it's not as blissful. And I know for myself, many times in my life, I felt somewhat like an automaton, like I'm just going through the motions, and the feelings were not really there. But it has served me well through these years to keep these vows, initiation vows that I made, for the simple reason that eventually the heartache and eventually the mental disturbance, it goes away. And when it does, I've gained something that I could not have gained otherwise. Over the last couple of weeks, my wife and I were both immunized for the COVID virus. And we got our first shot and it was pretty manageable. And then we got the second shots, we were like basket cases for 36 hours. Just felt horrible, headaches, fever, couldn't do anything. And then got a deep sleep and then woke up all better. So it's analogous to some of these difficulties that we get. They really make us feel bad. But after some time, they go away and their beneficial effects remain. So this is how we can persist and be steady, even in the face of unpleasant circumstances. Then finally, while we give up blaming others and accept responsibility, we are persistent in our spiritual practices. The final step is that we expect Krishna's mercy. Lord Brahma goes so far to say that if a devotee does these first two things, giving up the blame game and persisting, then it becomes that devotee's legal inheritance to go back to Godhead. It is the right, it becomes the rightful claim of the devotee. And just as in a case of an inheritance, all we have to do is stay alive and we receive the inheritance. If we are the beneficiary of a will, all we need to do is just stay alive and then we will inherit. So similarly, all a devotee needs to do is stay alive in Krishna consciousness. and the kingdom of God becomes that devotee's rightful claim. So this is the threefold step, the threefold method for remaining steady in Krishna consciousness. This last step is very important because it takes us full circle back to the position of being happy. You know, if we are destined to inherit something wonderful, then even our present circumstances are unpleasant. We have plenty to be happy about. You know, it is going to be our inheritance in the very near future. Whenever Krishna so desires, we're going to receive this great blessing. So this understanding of difficulty allows us to be steady. You know, we used to have a saying back in the passionate early days of our Krishna consciousness movement: work now, samadhi later. Do you remember this, Lakshmi Moni? Work now, samadhi later. It's like, okay, just be very vigorously spreading Krishna consciousness now and worry about thinking of Krishna later on. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 7th canto, there is a section where Hiranyakashipu is killed by Lord Nrsingadev very violently. And then all the demigods are afraid to approach him. So they say to Prahlad, you please go and talk to him. We're afraid. So Prahlad was not afraid. And he very gladly walked up and garlanded Lord Nrsingadev and bowed before him, offered his prostrated obeisances. And Lord Nrsingadev then used the same hand that he used to rip apart Hiranyakashipu to pat Prahlad on the head and bless him. So when he was so blessed, then Prahlad became empowered to speak eloquent prayers. So in the purport for that verse, Srila Prabhupada comments that Prahlad was not afraid because he was fixed in his service and he was steady, and therefore he was able to approach the Lord without fear. And it's a kind of samadhi in and of itself in service. You know, samadhi means sa, it means with, ma means mind, and di means fixed, stable. Samadhi. So when we are working for Krishna, like Prahlad, we can be thinking of Krishna. In fact, Srila Prabhupada said you cannot fail to think of the person you are serving when you are serving that person. It is, even if the service is done without much emotion or love, because it's being done, it's automatically an expression of love. So the steadiness of mind that we see in great devotees comes from this firm determination to serve constantly according to the best of our ability, with the understanding that we're not going to be perfect, we're not going to be flawless, we're going to be besought with faults. That's all right. It doesn't matter. Krishna will accept our offering, however imperfect. That's my spiel on this subject of steadiness in Krishna consciousness. So thank you for listening. I would be glad to hear your realizations and thoughts on the subject, any discussion you'd like to have.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. It was a wonderful presentation. So devotees, please, you can raise your hand either in the chat, or if you don't know how to do so, then feel free to speak up here. I'm going to go see if anybody raises their hand here. You can ask your question, place your comment. Oh, we have a question. Mother Ann, go right ahead.
Krishna, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I often have trouble with my microphone. So thank you so much for your lecture, Prabhu. It was so deep and enlivening. So thank you. And I used to teach mental resilience to the Canadian Armed Forces. And it's interesting because we used to say that guilt kills mental resilience. And so I was pleased to hear that guilt actually is in the mode of ignorance, but is very detrimental to spirituality. And last week we had another guest speaker, and now his name is, I cannot remember. Yes, thank you. And, he was saying that a part of our movement, and I'm sure I'm not quoting him correctly, but part of our movement is actually feeling guilty of not doing enough for Krishna, feeling guilty that we're not enough. And then later you said that actually Sanatana Goswami was offering very plain chapati with no burnt, and that's okay. And actually that's what Krishna wants. He wants all from us. And even if what we can give to him is very little, it's good. It's good enough. And so for that, I really thank you. It reminded me that no matter where I am at the moment in my path towards Krishna, as long as I give my full heart, it's good enough. And he will be able to appreciate that. So thank you.
Very nice. Thank you. Tell me, and what would you say to the Canadian soldiers about getting rid of their guilt? What was the strategy you would teach them to be resilient?
I was speaking about self-compassion. Well, first we need knowledge. We need to understand what mental health is and what mental illness is, so we can discriminate. But then I was also speaking about self-compassion. And one of the analogy I was giving is most of them had children. And so when a children tries to walk, which is probably, well, my case in Krishna consciousness, but when they start trying to walk, they stumble a lot. And what would happen if we would shame them, and if we would, sorry, I cannot think about the English word, but be mad at them. And they would probably become so afraid to walk, and it would probably delay their development. While being compassionate, using humor, being using acceptance with these children, they would be curious, adventurous, and they would probably walk more faster. And so we are not different, even as adults. So
very nice, very nice. Yes, they develop confidence by self-acceptance. Yes, very nice. It's so true in Krishna consciousness also. Just being willing to accept ourselves, which is hard because ourselves are, we've come to recognize not quite what our egos thought we were. But it's all right. We can accept ourselves as we are. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. So nice. Any other thoughts, comments? Yes.
Yes, we have Leela Kishore Prabhu. Welcome. You have a question. Please go ahead.
Well, Prabhu, thank you for sharing that. I was hearing a lecture a few weeks ago, and I heard in the lecture that Prabhupada said that it is difficult to come to Krishna consciousness. It is more difficult to stay in Krishna consciousness. It is most difficult to stay happy in Krishna consciousness. And I didn't follow that statement. And I mean, you threw some light in your lecture. I was wondering if you could specifically speak to that, because it seems like if I'm doing everything right, it would be just, byproduct of Krishna consciousness that I'll be happy. So if you could share what Prabhupada meant by that statement and throw some light, that would be helpful.
That's very interesting. Yes. Why is it difficult to be in Krishna consciousness or happy? At least sometimes it's difficult to be happy, is because of our expectations. We are expecting more of ourselves, and we're expecting more of Krishna. And if our own performance or Krishna's performance are not meeting our expectations, then we become dissatisfied. So on both accounts, the path towards happiness means we have to lower our expectations. And our estimations of ourselves. This doesn't mean thinking less of ourselves. It means thinking of ourselves less. In other words, instead of being preoccupied with our own shortcomings, with our own deficiencies, if instead we are thinking about others, we're thinking about serving devotees, we're thinking about serving Krishna. In that respect, we're lowering our expectations that we should be a great devotee and we should be recognized accordingly. You know, when we actually are thinking about others, we become happy. And similarly, if we're expecting Krishna is going to make us blissful all the time because we're in Krishna consciousness, that's an unreasonable expectation. So we read in the prayers of the Lord Chaitanya, Ashlishya Padaratam Panashtumam. Krishna, you're free to do anything and everything. You can make me happy, you can make me miserable, you can be a faithful lover, you can go play around with others. It doesn't matter, I will not deviate in my service to you. So expecting Krishna to do certain things is a cause of unhappiness. So the reason it's difficult is that we have to become actually sold out to Krishna regardless of what he does. And we have to stop thinking of ourselves as being so damn important.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So do we have any other questions, comments? Mother Lakshmi Moni, did you want to say something? I was just thinking, one point you were talking about, enduring, I guess, the difficulties and hardships, and just chugging through, keeping to our sadhana, to our devotional practice, and then in the end, the outcome is you can expect, our inheritance, or Krishna's mercy in one form or another. Krishna's mercy can come in many ways, yeah. But have that spirit of gratitude where we're doing it. And I was thinking that just like Arjuna, he's a warrior, and he's fighting, and he has to deal with the onslaughts of, well, like you were saying, much more serious circumstances than we may be facing. But I think about that sometimes. It's like you got to get up, you got to go do it, and the fighting spirit, just like Arjuna, he goes. It's not like you fall down, you get going. No, you have to fight sometimes. We have to try to overcome the difficulties, and it makes it a little bit more fun when you look at it in that spirit, right? When it's not like, oh, I just have to. It's like, no, the world is the battlefield, right? And we've been placed here for a purpose, and our purpose is to share Krishna consciousness, to be Krishna conscious, and etc.
It is a battle, yes, and that's the burden that devotees accept. That instead of just going with the flow in this material world, we're standing up and saying, no, I am taking a stand. This life is not meant for sense gratification. This life is meant for serving God. And this is my reason. This is my for being. This is my purpose. That's definitely going against the flow. And this is why, getting back to Leela Kishore Prabhu, your question, that it is difficult to be happy because we have to rise up for the battle. And battles are generally not where we go to find happiness. But the happiness actually exists in fulfilling our duty. The happiness exists in doing the right thing. And with experience and time, it just becomes more and more ingrained in us that, yes, actually, I will be benefited and I'll be happy by serving Krishna. One of my godbrothers asked Srila Prabhupada, once you start chanting, how long does it take to become purified? And he said, Prabhupada thought for a moment and said, about 40 years. So it is a process, gradual process by which our desires to enjoy this world and lord it over and find happiness through material things atrophies, and it just sort of fades away. That takes a long time, though. So it takes tenacity. Dridha Vrata. Thank you very much, Krishna Dulal Prabhu. A good point. All right, I think we are. Any other comments or questions?
Hare
We'll wrap it
Krishna.
up.
Oh, we
Hare
have,
Krishna.
yes,
Yes.
Hare Krishna. Harinam Rita Prabhu. Go ahead.
One simple question. We are in the moment passing through the material world. And how can we achieve a pure spiritual values on all of our efforts to go back to Godhead?
Please say that again, Prabhuji. I couldn't quite
See,
follow.
we are now running through the material world.
Hmm.
Every day we are passing through the material world with so many problems. Now, how can we achieve the pure spiritual values?
Hmm.
How do we achieve that?
Mhm.
While chanting or this, or but how do we purely get it?
Mhm. Well, one thing is that Krishna is like the sun, and the sun can remove all kinds of contaminations that we encounter in this material world. Srila Prabhupada gave the rather striking example that sunshine can produce pure distilled water from a puddle of urine. So if we keep ourselves in the sun of Krishna consciousness, we are eligible for getting Krishna's mercy. So the way you phrased your question, there's nothing we can really do to purify ourselves
That's
other
right.
than keep ourselves eligible for getting Krishna's mercy. There are many verses about this in the Shastra. In the 10th canto of the Gita, Krishna says, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam, dadami buddhi yogam tam jaina mam upayantite. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. You see? So we can give the devotion, but Krishna has to give the knowledge. Krishna has to give the purity. Krishna gives the enlightenment that you're describing. It is not within our power to acquire, but it is within our power to keep in the sunshine of Krishna consciousness and allow Krishna to act. He is the dynamic principle in this relationship. If we are determined, as Krishna Dulal Prabhu was saying, to keep practicing, to keep fighting, we keep ourselves eligible, and then Krishna acts. You understand?
That's right.
Yeah, so this means we have to be vulnerable. That means we have to put ourselves in a position of trust. Okay, Krishna, I'm giving you my life, my energy, and I trust that you will bring me to purification. Is that all right?
That's right. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
I have
Because I'm always a confused man.
I have a question for you. Prabhu, if I see correctly, your moniker there is Hare Krishna Money.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is that trademarked? That was one question.
This is a trademark I obtained when I was in the Middle East.
Okay. Very good. Where in the Middle East were you?
I was in Dubai for 26 years.
Oh, very nice. I have visited Dubai. It's a very nice place.
Yeah.
So I like your name.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So nice to meet you all and
Thank
be
you,
here with
Prabhu.
you this evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kalakantha Prabhu, for joining us this evening and taking the time to share some really practical tips and points that can help us in our spiritual life and becoming steady in spiritual life. And we've heard many things, wonderful things about you. I was actually present a few weeks ago when we had it was a leaders meeting or something, and then I saw that you composed a song, right? And it was it Yellow Submarine, to the tune of Yellow Submarine?
Yeah, I was ordered to do that by my group, so.
It was very good. It was so good. I think we only had like 10, 15 minutes to come up with it, and he came up with a 8-verse lyric put the music on the guitar. It was really, really wonderful. So your creativity, and there's wonderful things I hear that are happening also in Gainesville with the Krishna House program and the Krishna lunch. And we would all love to hear so much more, but there's almost so much time that we can spend on the call today. So we will have to have you back in one form or another, hopefully in the future. We hope that you will accept our invitation again. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Prabhu. I appreciate it.
Krishna.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Prabhupada.
Thank you all, everybody.
Yeah. And so now we're going to proceed with, we will have a little bit of darshan of the deities here. We have Shushigornitai, and there will be some kirtan at the temple. There are a few devotees at the temple, Kamalalochana Prabhu, Mother Kundalata. So please join us for kirtan. And if you have to take off, you have to leave, then we hope to see you again next week.